Okay, so before you prepare for a first lesson or try to teach a new bassoonist anything, it's a good idea to have a look at the instrument and make sure you have all the supplies that you need. One of the most important things about a working bassoon is that you have a good bocal. So the best thing to check on the bocal, first of all, you want to make sure there's no cracks or dents. It seems like a tiny piece of metal, but small pieces of damage can make a really big difference. Now, the biggest thing to check is that the bocal itself will hold a seal. So we're going to plug the very, very end and what's called the nib. There's a little vent right here on the side. If I plug both of those things and I can create a pop, then I know my bocal seals. So I'm just going to create some suction like a straw. And that bocal's working just fine. It's creating a pop. So I know that my bocal's in good shape. What about the whole instrument? Before I go on, a lot of bassoons will come with two bocals in the case. So what do I do with two? Well, if you look on the side, they generally have numbers. And so this is a 1 and this is a 2. And that has to do with the length. So a larger number is a longer bocal, and a smaller number is a shorter bocal. That has a lot to do with intonation and trying to fix that for a bassoon player, but generally you're going to want to go with number 2 if you have two choices. Sometimes you'll have 1 and 2, and sometimes you might have 2 and 3, but 2 is generally a good choice for a bocal length for a beginner. So the whole instrument is worth a good look over, and if it's been sitting back in the band storage room for a long time, or it was just donated, or just generally hasn't been played in a long time, you're really going to probably want to get it repaired. Almost definitely something is wrong. Keep in mind that not all woodwind specialists or even general repair people are bassoon specialists or even qualified to work on a bassoon. So ask a bassoon specialist near you or try to find someone who specializes in bassoon repair. On first glance, though, there's a few things you can check. So you can look and make sure that all the pads are sealing. Specifically, it's a good idea to check some of the pads here at the very, very end of the long joint. It's really easy to bend some of those keys, and so those pads might obviously not be sealing. And otherwise, just use your general woodwind judgment to see that all the pads are sealing appropriately. As far as the seat strap and the neck strap, you better have one or the other. You won't get very far in your bassoon lesson if you don't have a seat strap or a neck strap. The thing about the neck strap is that most bassoons have a ring for the neck strap right here, and you can see that that's not a great balance point for the bassoon, and actually if you got a neck strap on there, it wants to tip and fall away. It takes more work than it should to keep that up. There is an attachment, it's called a hanger, that will stick up further and makes the neck strap more appropriate. But generally for a beginner, a seat strap is going to work great. Some teachers will use a neck strap and a seat strap to help the student hold the bassoon and just make sure that it doesn't fall during the first few times that they play. So if safety seems like a good idea to you, you could certainly try to do both. Another thing that you're really going to need is the reed. So there are some obvious checks, just like other woodwinds, to make sure that your reed is in good shape. There should be no chips or cracks. Right up the center, bassoon reeds can get a big long crack, and even if it's back here down in the bottom of the reed, toward the bottom here, it's still not going to work well. So you need a reed that looks like it's whole and has clear corners, and both sides, make sure to look at both sides because there are two reeds there. The tube in the very back should be round and needs to go about 8 millimeters onto the bocal without sitting and wiggling. There's some things we can do with the reed to make it work better, and if there are little problems, there are some things you can learn to fix, and we'll talk about those later. But in general, as long as it's not chipped or cracked, that reed's going to be in good shape. A student should have at least 2 bassoon reeds when they get started, because as you know, probably double reeds are a little bit finicky, and some days one works and the other doesn't. But also, if they're buying reeds from a manufacturer or a non-handmade source, honestly, one of those two reeds might not be very good. So at least if they have two different reeds, they have a pretty good chance of having a working reed. And they also need a reed case, not usually the one that the reeds come in from the manufacturer. Those don't have enough ventilation. And bassoon reeds get fully soaked in water. So they have a lot of water in them when they go back in the case, and if there's no ventilation, it's easy for mold to grow on your reeds. Some players will play them anyway after they're moldy, but health-wise, not a good plan. So make sure that they have a good reed case, preferably something that has holes in it. So this reed case did not used to have holes in it, but now a couple have been drilled in the top, and it has enough ventilation for the reeds inside to dry out in between playing. They also need a water container. So right now I'm using a big cup of water, but it doesn't hurt to have something that seals, like a Tupperware container or even like an old prescription bottle, since it has a lid that sort of twists on. Bassoon reeds, sort of unlike oboe reeds, go fully into the water. You don't have to worry about the extra cork, which is on an oboe reed. So they can totally put it in. It used to be film canisters, and now those are much harder to find. But you can totally put it in a fully enclosed container with water, and that works great, especially because bassoon reeds need a couple of minutes to soak before class. Also, you're going to want to make sure your bassoonist carries their reed around in their mouth so they're not chipping it on everything. All right. You also, before your first lesson, want to make sure that you've picked a method book, something that the student can take home and practice. You can use the band method that you have, but it also helps a lot to have a bassoon-specific method. There's a link to that down below this video, some suggestions that I've come across. But whatever you have, make sure that before the first lesson, you have that book picked out and ready to go, so you can send them home with something to practice. Maintenance is also an important part of the first lesson, so make sure you have at least a swab. And this is a Selmer bassoon swab, kind of long, skinny, and a tube of cork grease. You saw those big giant corks on the wing joint and the long joint. They need a lot of cork grease, so make sure that the student doesn't go home with a bassoon with new corks and no cork grease. They will work too hard to put it all together. So if you've got all those supplies and you've got an idea of what you want to teach in your first lesson, then you're ready to go.